Hello, I'm Ray Martin. Mike Willesee and I go way back. In fact, I was in the Canberra studios of the ABC 50 years ago when he auditioned for his very first television job on This Day Tonight. And later I filled in for him regularly at Channel 9 when he was away from the desk. If you ask me, he is the best current affairs host and interviewer we've yet produced. And like everyone who knows him, I was distressed to hear of Mike's recent cancer diagnosis. But Willow always steps up to a challenge, and this one will be answered with his characteristic grit and his good humour. Tonight is the second part of Mike's Australian story. So let's begin with a quick recap.
That's beautiful. You're a lucky boy.
Dad's a curious character to me. I don't know what makes him tick.
We were a typical Catholic family. All the boys were altar boys.
When I was about 10, Dad said, I'm going to send you up to Bindoon for a while. I said, why, Dad? And he said, you need to toughen up. I was terrified. It changed me.
Mike and I started in television together some 50 years ago on probably the craziest current affairs program that could be invented.
There was movement at the station, the word had got around.
This Day Tonight was just magnificent for me because the timing was right.
The villagers are frightened. They have no way of knowing they are not the targets.
Vietnam was dangerous at times. I have asked myself, am I attracted by the danger?
Dad has made some really bold moves throughout his career.
Welcome to a current affair.
To be called a sex symbol and be told that's why your program works, that actually was an insult to me.
Mike Willesee, enigma, a quiet sex symbol or a dull man with thick lips. I read that.
Dad claims that it was the disintegration of the marriage that really tipped his drinking into alcoholism.
Stan Pryor's talent for belting out a tune on his trusty old cornet.
When I didn't know I had a problem, I was defenceless against it. When I did know the problem, then I could start dealing with it.
All right, Mike, do you want the music on or off today?
Oh, yeah, leave the music on.
I didn't realise how important his voice was to him until he got throat cancer. In the short term, it was the thought of losing his voice that really upset him.
Pack up, let's fly away.
Welcome to our new segment, Health is Food. And we brought in today from, where we come from? Perth, okay. And Colin's going to cook something that will make me healthy in minutes. You can see it happen before your eyes.
It's not easy seeing your siblings sick. I've already lost a brother and a sister.
Is that going down any easier?
He does need to be cared for at the moment.
Bit by bit. I couldn't say day by day.
I'm his big sister, so I'll be there.
I found radiation therapy to be pretty tough going. We didn't have this stuff when we were kids.
It's doing you good, though.
Yeah, it's working. It's been frustrating that it's slow, but it's working exactly as the doctor said.
He's certainly trying really hard. It's so difficult for him to get food down, even the nourishing drinks that we can give him. And it is difficult for him, but he is doing it.
Thanks. You're the best.
Anytime.
I'm a lucky boy to have a sister like her.
He's so resolute about beating it, and he is a tough guy. Make no mistake, Mike Willesee's a tough guy.
Will you beat Bob Hawke at the next federal election?
He also had to be tough in those interviews with politicians who were trying to pull the wool over his eyes.
You've been treated, I think, less than fairly in the press at times with repeated references to the Sun Lamp Kid, the Kooyong Colt, even the famous Gucci toothbrush. Do you laugh that off or does it hurt?
Well, those sorts of things don't worry me.
He had to stand up to them as well. It's not easy. He made it look easy.
There are clear and opposing factions in your own party. You have a resignation and 2 sackings from your front bench in recent times. And your position's never been better?
It has never been better.
Tell me about the bad days.
I don't think he ever regarded interviews as a form of verbal combat. He was certainly challenging, but he preferred to let people hang themselves rather than to go, you know, at their throats like a snarling Doberman.
I'm just a bit concerned about the veracity of this alleged contract. You say, as far as you know, someone signed it.
Well, it's certainly the...
I mean, you've raised it, you know, on a national forum today.
Exactly.
It was 1993, federal election. John Hewson, the clear favourite.
Last night's debate put John Hewson one step closer to the Lodge.
And then Mike Willesee produced, of all things, a birthday cake.
If I buy a birthday cake from a cake shop and GST is in place, do I pay more or less for that birthday cake?
Well, it will depend whether cakes today in that shop are subject to sales tax or they're not, firstly, and they may have a sales tax on them. Let's assume that they don't have a sales tax on them, and then that birthday cake is going to be sales tax free. Then, of course, you wouldn't pay, it would be exempt, so there would be no GST on it under our system.
He was the Prime Minister in waiting. He was the architect of the GST.
Well, you know, our proponent wants to put a 15% tax on all this.
We don't like it.
And we needed to see how he understood it.
And then the difference would be the difference between the two taxes, whatever the sales tax rate is on birthday cakes, how it's decorated, because...
It was a masterful question, and Hewson fell right into the trap.
Right,
and there's icing and maybe ice cream, and then there's candles on top of it.
That's right. Now, that's the difficult... That's what I'm addressing in the question. To give you an accurate answer, I need to know exactly what type of cake.
He didn't understand it from the point of view of the consumer, the taxpayer. He understood it as an economist.
Then, of course, we scrapped the sales tax before the GST would be imposed.
It's just an example. If the answer to a birthday cake is so complex, you do have a problem with the overall GST, don't you?
Well, the difficulty we've got...
I was living in America at the time, and I called Mike out of the blue, and he'd just come up from the studio downstairs, and he was... I could tell something had happened. He was very, very excited. I said, "What's going on?" He said, "I've just done an interview with John Hewson." He said, "I think it's going to turn the election."
It destroyed Hewson's credibility. I think his campaign was shot.
Well, this is the sweetest victory of all.
It was called the unlosable election, and he lost that 10%.
The Hewson interview was Willesee at his prosecutorial best. But then, less than a month later, he was under heavy fire himself over the so-called Cangy siege.
Tonight, the trail of murder that has led to a siege in a farmhouse in northern New South Wales. In a moment, my chilling phone conversation with the killers and the children they held hostage. I was driving to work one day and my car phone rang and I was told that one of the killers was on the line to my studio, and if I could get there in a hurry, I could do the interview. So I sped to the studio, literally drove the car into the studio and sat down, and with no time for any preparation, interviewed this self-confessed killer. Even if you've got a legitimate beef with the cops, Leonard, it's a bit tough to go and kill a 14-year-old girl and 3 minors.
Well, I suppose you've got an argument there, but at the same time I had to be ensured that the police hated my guts.
He told me that both children were there and I asked to speak to them. I was later criticised for putting them in danger by doing that. Have you seen him do bad things?
No.
Did you see anybody get killed?
No.
Do you know that Leonard and Robbie have killed some people?
No.
I know I asked a couple of questions that I shouldn't have asked. Under the circumstances, I made a couple of small mistakes. I think I've done a lot of better things. However, the fact that I had a hand in those 2 kids being released is terribly important to me. Of course, he may well have let them go without me talking to him, but we'll never know. I did ask him, and he did let them go.
I think this is a classic case where we misjudge the audience reaction. After it was over, I remember watching the interviews and thinking, what a wonderful scoop we have here. This is amazing. This is great journalism and all the rest of it. And yet while I was watching it in the boardroom at Channel 9, I could notice all the women looking astounded and disgusted. And I thought, oh my God, I've read this wrong. The journalistic motivation was clear, to get a scoop. But we didn't foresee the backlash that happened as a result of it.
So what did he do? He asked to speak to the children, who he knew were at the mercy of this murderous madman, but not just to speak to them. He was going to ask them questions that could only have further endangered their lives.
Have you seen Leonard and Robbie do some bad things?
No.
No.
Willesee was called exploitative, inhumane, offensive and an ego tripper.
I don't think Mike was guilty of cynicism. I might have been guilty of cynicism, but not Mike. He genuinely thought, I think, that he was doing a public service and protecting the kids.
But here in the mighty Amazon, there's a biological argument which says...
I got sick of presenting nightly current affairs programs. I thought I'd done too much of it. There were too many interviews that were just pedestrian to me, no challenge in them. I always wanted to make documentaries. It's just a better opportunity to tell a story.
It was the late 90s. I was talking to Mike about a tribe in southern Sudan called the Dinkas. To get into the southern Sudan, you fly out of Wilson Airport in Nairobi. So we were there before dawn, boarded the plane, all the equipment.
I had a premonition, and I did not believe in premonitions. So when I had it, I couldn't understand it. I had this fight in my own head before I got on the plane. How do I tell Greg that it's going to crash? So I stayed on the plane. But did I believe it was going to crash? Absolutely. Not it might crash, could crash, it is going to crash.
We're sitting waiting, and it was just a downpour of incredible storm. You couldn't see the outside anything. It was just rain pouring off the plane. So I thought, oh, we'll sit here for a while until the storm passes, then we'll take off. But no, the pilot taxied onto the runway, the engines revved up, and off we took.
And when it stalled and just stopped for just one excruciating second and then started to spiral and go down, the only thought I could get out of my head before my head was getting buffeted against the fuselage was I was right, which is pretty freaky. Not even scared, just I was right, because that was dominating my thinking. How can I know this plane is going to crash? And I said my first prayer to a God who I didn't understand and whose existence I was quite unsure of.
And we just plummeted into the game park and we smashed into the ground. And caught up with Mike, and we sort of stood and looked back at the plane thinking, what just happened? And while Mike's standing there, he said, I had a premonition we might crash. And I said, really? I said, so what did you do? And he said, I just prayed. I said, God, into your hands I commit Greg and my soul. And I said, well, next time you let me know and I'll get out and film it for you.
The plane crash changed me a lot, but it was very slow. It still took me maybe about 2 years for me to actually say, there is a God. In my mind, yes, there's a God. And that's good for me.
I'm not sure if there was one thing that triggered Dad's return to the church, but I suspect it was at a time of his life where he maybe was becoming more reflective. We were brought up in a very sceptical, atheist family. So then to see him, when we were young adults, to then really go back to the church in a big way, it was a surprise. It's something that we don't really understand.
Welcome to Fox Studios in Los Angeles. The show you are about to watch was 7 years in the making.
I first met Mike over 35 years ago when he bought the property next door to me.
Rhonda kept telling me about this woman in Bolivia, Katia Rivas, who was having supernatural experiences. And in my superior, clever way, I knew these things didn't happen.
Mike's response to me was, oh, look, Ron, you don't believe in all that sort of junk, do you? He says, I've done stories like this tons of times. Every time I've done a story that's of the type you're talking about, it's been a fraud or a hoax.
So I didn't listen very carefully, but he kept at me, and he finally challenged me.
I said, why don't you at least have a look at the facts and then tell me what you think? I said, better still, why don't you prove me wrong?
I've worked on a lot of stories with Mike over the years, and I don't know of a story that he's thrown more energy into than this, and trying to find some explanation behind signs from God or, do miracles exist?
Hello, LA. It's Dusty in Bolivia.
Dusty, this is Ben.
One of the first shows I worked on with my dad was called Signs from God, and it ran live to air in America and was watched by 28 million Americans. And it was huge.
Rhonda told me she experienced stigmata. I said, has it ever been filmed? He said, once, but not from start to finish. The wounds from the Passion of Christ came firstly in the thorns in her forehead. Just one by one, spots started to bleed. Then in the hands, the front, the back. What was as amazing was the next morning we went back and the wounds had disappeared.
Medically, that's impossible.
And summing up yesterday, what would you say?
God was present. It was amazing. Miracle.
It wasn't a plan, it wasn't my ambition to be the reporter for miracles.
Dad was very moved by what he was seeing in Bolivia, especially with the stigmata, and I think it was just adding to his growing religious beliefs, and his faith's only grown stronger from there.
I was led into a situation where I saw something that was supernatural. The easiest thing for me to do would have been to walk away from that.
It didn't surprise me because he was always unpredictable. And, you know, there was clearly a religious side to him. He's clearly deeply devout and, you know, that's admirable. I just didn't think it was an avenue for productive journalism.
I'm quite sceptical of the things that he believes in, and he understands that, but I respect what he has studied and believes, and maybe he'll prove us all wrong in the long run. But right now, yeah, I'm a sceptic. He started out a sceptic, he's not now, but I remain one.
When your friends die, where do they go?
Heaven. Where else?
What's heaven like?
I know, I've never been there.
What do you think it's like?
I don't know. You'll be there before I am.
I've filmed many stories over the years,
You're a wise man.
but no story has had more impact or lasting memories than the story of Quentin.
Quentin, I've interviewed about 8 prime ministers and you're harder than all of them put together.
What?
Mike sees Quentin as a distant relative. He's been so involved in his life for such a long period of time, for 36 of his 40 years.
Now, you told our producer, Alex, that you didn't want to be asked about God, but you said to me, ask me anything you want. So my question is, why don't you want to talk about God?
Alex?
Quentin, what did you say to me?
Why do I not want to talk about God? Because I spent 10 years watching you run around the world gabbing about God.
No, you haven't.
Yes, I have.
Hola. Nice to see you.
I spent about 5 years working really closely with Mike.
Been a while.
I'm good.
So, as are you?
Mike and I connect professionally and personally.
Got something for you. Lost a little bit of weight.
Yeah, 10 or 12 kilos. They did all. Yeah.
Your voice is kind of sexy in a way. Isn't it?
All right, stand back.
I've had a brush with cancer and I've woken up in hospital to see Mike standing at the foot of my bed, which made the nurses all pretty excited. And my mum, that's for sure. He came in and he stood quietly by my bed.
I start thinking about one story and I find myself smiling, and, you know, not just in the story, but things that happen with us on the road. And
I'm really proud of the Bali 9 story.
Yeah.
It's a really important story.
I met Andrew Chan and my Yuran Sukumaran a little over a year ago. Spent some time with them inside Karabakan prison.
And this is home? Yeah.
Mike spent months and months and months working with Julian McMahon, the human rights barrister, looking to seek clemency for Andrew Chan and Yuran Sukumaran.
my Yuran was really afraid of dying because I really believed they wouldn't assassinate him. I told him that, and I hope I didn't give him false hope. My Yuran Sukumaran was very aware of that death sentence every day. Andrew Chan, God played a much bigger part in his life, so I shouldn't really say this for him, but I think the spectre of sudden death didn't frighten him as much. They're two very impressive young men.
I was with Mike in April 2015 when the boys were executed, and he was absolutely shattered to the core. Mike, being in his older years, I think he's a very tender soul, and so to see two young men, you know, in the prime of their life, doing everything they can to seek redemption and be given a chance to live was something he found very difficult.
About 12 months ago, I was getting sick and I had a lot of pain in one side of my jaw.
Fairly rapidly, we reached a diagnosis of a cancer in the area just above his voice box. Not only that, unfortunately, some of his scans at that time showed that this cancer had spread to the lymph glands in his neck and also to areas within both of his lungs. He tells me he smoked cigars, and if you smoke cigars, cigars are no safer than cigarettes really. But if you smoke, then there is a risk of cancers of the mouth, of the throat, of the lungs.
Obviously it was devastating. At that point we didn't know how bad it was, but within a fortnight it became clear that it was very bad news.
And the prognosis wasn't very good, 6 to 12 months.
The fact that it had spread to another organ, his lungs, means that it is an advanced cancer. We would call that a stage 4 cancer.
Did you think it was curable?
No, I did not think it was curable, and I still don't think it's curable.
Okay, who wants to get on? Want to get on? What if I hold you, Maggie?
Dad was put on a trial immunotherapy drug called Keytruda, and we were told from the beginning that while it could be very successful in some people, not to hold out hope of a miracle with it.
And it worked like a miracle. My throat, neck and lungs were riddled with cancer, and after a few months they were all gone. It was really hard to believe, you know, having gone through the shock of being told and